The budget phone. For years it has carried the stigma of a lower quality, corner-cutting device that makes sacrifices in performance, cameras, display, and build quality. Well, some years ago now, that all changed with Xiaomi's Poco F1, a phone which offered pretty close to a $1,000 flagship experience for only $350. It changed our perception of what a budget phone could be. With a great display, better than average cameras, and flagship specs for less than half the cost of an actual flagship phone. Enter its successor, the Poco F2 Pro, a phone which pushes the boundaries of its predecessor without breaking the bank. Though the price increased by nearly double, it got a bump up in specs all the way across the board, while bringing some new unique features to the table, including a novelty pop-up selfie camera, which gives it an uninterrupted viewing experience. But is the Poco F2 Pro worth its price tag when there are so many ultra-competitive phones in its price range? I'm Dave with TechDove. Let's find out. The Poco F1 came with a reasonable 6.2-inch LCD display. Given its low price tag though, many wished it had been an OLED. This, along with the large notch of the F1, is something the F2 Pro remedied with its 6.67-inch 1080 by 2400 OLED display. Gone is the massive notch of the F1, and instead we get a very cool 20-megapixel motorized pop-up camera. More on that later. This display is very sharp, and I'm not upset about the lack of 1440p resolution, nor its 60Hz refresh rate. Its colors are beautiful, contrast is on par with much more expensive phones, as is the peak brightness of 854 nits, 500 of which are sustained. This display is a joy to view content on, with its 87.2% screen-to-body ratio, and zero display interruptions, such as a notch or a hole-punch selfie camera. The bezels around the display are very minimal too, which helps with the immersion of content. For its price, this is one of the best displays I've seen. Xiaomi definitely deserves some brownie points here. They could have easily cut corners with an LCD panel, though I'm glad they didn't. Something you'd expect from a phone at this price point would be poor build quality. Maybe some plastic on the back or a very poor in-hand feel. Well, if you're considering this phone, you'll be happy to know that's certainly not what you get here. The Poco F2 Pro has a heft to it that reminds me of the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Not only is the size very similar, but so is the weight and the fit and finish. Well, yes, it doesn't have a stainless steel frame like the Apple device. What it does have is robust build quality and a surprising weight of 219 grams, or just over 7.5 ounces, compared to the aforementioned iPhone 7.97 ounces. It feels great. The weight of this phone lends itself to a feeling of quality you just don't normally see, or rather feel, in this price range. It has a beefy aluminum frame with Gorilla Glass 5 on the back and Gorilla Glass 6 on the front. Probably my only gripe with the build quality is the placement of the power and volume buttons, as I prefer to have them separated on the left and right sides. That's just nitpicking though. Another potential issue some of you may find is the lack of ingress protection. Due to the pop-up selfie camera, it obviously does not carry the IP67 or IP68 rating of many of its contemporaries. But it does include a modest IP53 splash resistance rating, and after all, that's better than nothing. Speaking of better than nothing, the Poco F2 Pro doesn't have the typical stereo speaker pair, instead opting for a single bottom-mounted speaker. Now, before you write it off, just know this speaker gets plenty loud. It's crisp and it's not as tinny as most budget phones are. It's only lacking in the mids, which is excusable because of just how good this single speaker sounds, even when compared to phones double its price, and especially in its own price bracket. Another delight this phone brings with its small asking price is the headphone jack, which I can't believe is actually a selling point. I wish it never went away in the first place. Being the tech enthusiast I very clearly am, you would think I'd welcome the wireless future with open arms. However, I still prefer the wired option, without needing to congest the only other port on the phone to do so. Audio from the beloved 3.5mm port is excellent. It's not LG Quad that good, rest in peace, but it's better than just about every other phone that still retains it. Typically, when you're spending under $600 on a phone, you can expect to compromise on the performance side of things. As has been the prominent theme of this video, that is not so here. Even with Xiaomi's oftentimes heavy MIUI skin on top of Android, the Poco F2 Pro has performance headroom to spare. Boasting the Snapdragon 865 system on a chip paired with either 6 or 8 GB of RAM, and 128 or 256 gigabytes of storage, this is a flagship level performer through and through. Gaming is great, even if it doesn't have a top of the line 120Hz display. It will run even the most demanding mobile titles at up to 60Hz. Multitasking is a breeze too, even if Xiaomi's MIUI skin does have annoying advertisements baked in when you install a new app. But hey, I've learned to live with it, even if I don't like it. This phone really is just that enjoyable to use. It's like overlooking a flaw in your favorite person. At the end of the day, you still enjoy their company. And enjoy its company you will. The Poco F2 Pro is easily a 2-day phone with its 1080p OLED screen and 4700 mAh battery. This thing is an endurance champion. I'm able to go the entire day and most of the next on a single charge. And for when you do need to plug it in, it ships with a 30-watt fast charger, which can get you from 0 to 100% in an hour flat. I've easily gotten around 9 hours of screen on time on lighter days and just around 7 on heavier ones. And that carried over to the next day. I haven't been this impressed with a phone since the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Many have criticized MIUI for being too cartoony, or too bloated, and while it's not my favorite Android skin, I've actually only taken issue to the ads served up in certain areas of the software. Otherwise it feels very much like a mixture of Samsung's older pre-One UI skin, otherwise known as TouchWiz or Samsung Experience or whatever they were calling it, mixed with elements of LG skin. That is to say that MIUI, in my opinion, takes some of the best elements of other skins and puts them all into one place. The F2 Pro is running Android 11 with MIUI 12.6.2 on top at the time of this video. It's snappy, responsive, and at least for my taste, not intrusive or ugly as others have deemed it to be. Currently, my F2 Pro is on the May 1st security patch from Google, and it seems to be pretty quick with the rollouts of updates. On the security side of things, the F2 Pro has 2 biometric options. Starting in order of which is more secure and which is least secure, is the under-screen fingerprint scanner, which is of the optical variety and not ultrasonic like found on Samsung flagships, and it's good. It's pretty fast and accurate, though if you're using a glass screen protector, it may take a few more tries than usual to read your print. The second of the biometric authentication aboard this phone is the pop-up selfie camera, which works well given it has the proper amount of lighting, though don't expect it to be as secure as Apple's Face ID system, because after all, it is just a front-facing camera scanning your face and it can be fooled. Speaking of cameras, when I first made the decision to review this device, I wasn't expecting too much of its cameras. I thought to myself, surely at this price point the cameras must be garbage tier. And boy was I wrong. Mostly. Let me explain. Firstly, this device technically does have 4 cameras around back. The first of which being a 64 megapixel main sensor with an aperture of f1.9, and shots from this are great. There's plenty of detail, and it does great with dynamic range, and it doesn't oversaturate shots. Its main downfall is in low light. While I appreciate that there is a night mode option, its results are wildly inconsistent to rely on in any given situation. It's capable of 8K video recording at 24 or 30 FPS, though I wouldn't count on the very dubious quality of mobile 8K recording from a smartphone. The usual suspects are here as well, with 4K 30 and 4K 60 FPS video recording, and it's perfectly serviceable, if sometimes noisy when not fed enough light. You also get 1080p 30, 60, 120, and 240 FPS video capture, and even 1080p 960 FPS super slow-mo. I wouldn't compare this phone to iPhones, Samsungs, or Pixels in terms of video recording capabilities, but the videos from this definitely don't look like they're from a sub $600 phone. Our second camera here is the 13 megapixel 123 degree ultra-wide with an aperture of f2.4. And what's most impressive to me about this particular sensor is that many phones suffer from varying degrees of color science between their sensors, or how they process colors in their photos. And I'm happy to report that between the main camera and the ultra-wide, there isn't too much of a difference between how the two sensors handle colors, though the ultra-wide can sometimes overexpose in brightly lit situations. Detail, however, is great and it doesn't seem to suffer from the barrel distortion around the edges as some other ultra-wides do, though I'll let you be the judge. The last two cameras are barely worth talking about, but as I strive to provide complete and honest reviews, here we go. The final two cameras are comprised of one 2 megapixel depth sensor, which is used to aid in the capture of the oh so popular portrait mode photos, and finally a 5 megapixel macro camera, whose results are far better than a 2 megapixel macro camera would be. But I would probably just stick to the ultra wide for macro shots, as the higher resolution will give you far better results. Which brings us finally to the star of the show, at least in my opinion. The 20 megapixel motorized pop-up camera. With an aperture of f2.2, shots from this camera are decent if a little bit soft. Colors are great, and it doesn't seem to struggle with dynamic range as much as many phones in this price bracket do. And as I mentioned earlier, it can double as a face scanner. And if you're worried about destroying the pop-up camera, if and or when you drop this phone, Xiaomi has you covered. It uses the phone's onboard accelerometer to detect the fall and retract the camera. And while I didn't extensively test how long or from what distance it closes, I can tell you it does retract pretty quickly. While the original Poco phone launched at a price of $350, it lacked many of the flagship-like features the F2 Pro enjoys, as well as a novelty pop-up camera that gives its users a truly full-screen experience. And while it launched last May for a starting price of $500 for the 6GB of RAM, 128GB of storage variant, or $550 for the 8GB 256GB of storage, it can routinely be found for under $400 today, which is a steal for all the phone you're getting here. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with this phone, and it's still a strong contender today, even if it lacks memory card expansion and a 120Hz display. While the mainstream high-end flagship phones are happy to sell you less phone for more money, there exists a market that's growing stronger every day. The budget to mid-range market, to be exact. And the phones coming from this tier of the smartphone hierarchy are some of the very best you can get. And the Poco F2 Pro is proof of that. For $500 you get a headphone jack, a pop-up camera, and a true full-screen experience with absolutely amazing battery life and performance, as well as an IR blaster to control your TV and other devices with. I mean, seriously, when is the last time you saw that? And while this is a love story of sorts, as I found myself coming back to it again and again, it's not perfect. It has a few quirks with its camera system where corners were definitely cut to make this price point. And it lacks expandable storage, and the screen only tops out at 1080p 60Hz. It's a phone that even a year later, I have no issues recommending. Thanks for watching. Get subscribed for my Note 20 Ultra review coming up next. And follow me on Instagram @TechDove for behind the scenes and updates on future projects.